The story from here on divides itself into two great phases. The first, control in the pre-belly tank days, when all the action was within normal radar and radio range from England, and the control board displayed standard information of where friendly and enemy formations were at all times. The second, dating from the day our aircraft flew out of radar range and beyond our ken. It must be understood, of course, that these two phases overlapped. The groups began testing auxiliary tanks in the last days of July, and on 8 Fighter Command Field Order Number 83, July 28, 1943, the 78th Group reported flying a total of 546 miles, an almost unheard of distance for Thunderbolts. On that day, the group was as far east as Nijmegen, Holland, just about the outer limit of radar plotting range from England. But even after that, there were many missions inside the 200-mile circle, controllable by the old methods. There had to be, because the changeover to a long-range technique was a difficult exploration of a new field. What were these old methods of control? Simply the standard ones of a normal air defense system. Tracking of flights by observer reports and radar search apparatus. Identification of hostile plots by a process of elimination. Controlling fighters by direct radio contact from the vicinity of home base. Intercepting the enemy if possible, furnishing homing and air/sea rescue services. Radar and observer core plots continue to be fed into Saffron Walden from RAF sources in much the same manner as when it was an 11-group sector control center. Only instead of WAFs operating the magnetic plotting rods and placing the colored metal arrows on the board, there were GIs. The air-sea/rescue B-channel triangulation table was removed from Hornchurch and installed in an upper room in the ops building at Saffron, along with a similar triangular table for D-channel, fixing frequency common to all groups of the wing. The B and D channel controllers were on either side of the chief controller in the ops room, where their activities with respect to any particular aircraft could be instantly coordinated. Each fighter group was provided with one exclusive operational frequency channel, A, to give the pilots uninterrupted intercom during combat, and to permit A, individual controlling of that particular group, and B, flying control and holding services at the group's home base. In the ops room at Saffron, a position was provided for a controller for each group. It was his job to watch the radar plots, keep track of his own group, and warned the group leader of the approach of the other formations, both friendly and enemy. His work was supervised and could be monitored by the chief controller. It was through the chief controller that information obtained on one channel was coordinated with the others. If, to give a simple example, a group controller learned on channel A that one of his pilots was in trouble and was going over to B channel to Mayday, he would pass the essential facts with the pilot's call sign to the chief controller, who in turn would alert the B channel control team and fixer layout to listen for the call. This was often of considerable help because on days when the radio was not clear or crowded with too much chatter, it was hard to understand the call signs and single out the distress calls. Knowing what to listen for sometimes made the difference between getting a good fix or a poor one. Information obtained or B or D channel likewise was helpful to the group controller on channel. Radar plots often lost their identities in a mix-up. A symbol on the board which indicated the RAF radar filter room was no longer able to keep all the enemy and friendly formations separately tagged. In such a situation, particularly with enemy formations hovering about in the vicinity, it was vitally important for the group controller to find out as quickly as possible the exact location of his aircraft. A fix obtained on B or D sometimes came in the nick of time. Not necessarily a life and death matter for the pilot, of course. He had his own wits and knowledge to depend on, and could be expected to protect himself from an enemy attack even if control failed to warn him of it. But from the standpoint of overall success of missions, of carrying the war to the enemy, of getting the aircraft to their target and back, the guidance of an expert controller was a necessary link in the chain. To complete this quick survey of control services as of July 1943, it is necessary to mention what to many pilots is the most important of all: homing. Locally, this was on Channel A, the group operational frequency. The flying control officer in the tower on home base could ordinarily communicate with these pilots up to 150 miles or so, sometimes much farther. Captain Minshew off the 355th Group once got a homing from Steeple Morden when he was 27,000 feet over the Zuiderzee, well over 200 miles, and Colonel Joe Mason of the 352nd Group used to swear he could get a homing from Bodney at 300 miles at 30,000 feet. But usually when a group was coming home, it would shift over from wing control to the local homer about 100 miles or so away, getting information about the weather conditions at the field and other instructions. A direction-finding receiver at the base took bearings on the pilot's transmissions, and flying control could thus give each pilot a compass direction to fly. Somewhat beyond the working radius of this service, a pilot could rely on the wing fixing surfaces of Channel D to locate him and steer him to home base or to a nearer field if he were in trouble. In extreme emergencies, the Air/Sea Rescue Controller on Channel B could also furnish homing instructions, and most RAF airdromes were equipped to set up homers on this channel at Safran's request. Both B and D controllers use Cray computers, see photo on following page, to speed up the service. Channel C, intended to be a common frequency for intercom among bombers and fighters of the 8th, was also at this early stage chiefly used by the fighters for emergency homings. Later American homer stations with C channel crystals were established at several key RAF airdromes, see map in CH4. And in this manner whole groups were sometimes brought into strange fields when sudden weather changes made home bases unusable. At the Safran, a controller always maintained a listening watch on Channel C to be ready for such emergencies, and every American fighter base was prepared to set up a homer on this channel at control's request. How much all this meant to fighter pilots can be told in a later instance, typical of countless similar ones over these 2 years. The scene is the sunny afternoon sky over Hanover on a day in March 1944. The occasion is the baptism of fire of a very new pilot, Lieutenant Frank Fahm, of the 359th Fighter Group, on his second mission to Germany. In the ops room at Safran Walden, each B and D channel controller used this instrument as a rapid means of calculating steers to be given to aircraft previously fixed by the D/F system. It can be seen in the photo opposite that the transparent rectangular plate for measuring course and distance is linked to the rest of the machine by a parallel arm motion, which transmits rotation. This enables corrections for wind direction, wind speed, compass variation, and true air speed to be set off, and a corrected magnetic bearing from point of fix to a desired destination to be read directly and passed to the aircraft. The controller's assistant could usually make the necessary settings while the controller was making his first call. Wind direction is set by rotating the inner part of the white disc at the left. Wind speed is set by sliding the pin in the radial slot in the white disc. Compass variation is put in with the black disc on the arm extension at right. Speed of the aircraft is set on a transparent slotted slide which crosses the white disc at the left. It was found best in AS/R control at Safran to use 160 miles per hour for bombers, 184 for P-47s, and 200 for P-51s at low altitudes, i.e. 2,000 to 5,000 feet. About 15 miles per hour were added for each additional 5,000 feet of altitude. Fang's flight leader, Lieutenant Charles the Mad German Kruger, fastened onto the tail of a Me 109 at 15,000 feet, and never turned loose until he shot it to pieces at 4,000. Throughout the wild chase, Fang and another pilot held grimly to formation. The fourth man of the flight had disappeared in the melee. The three Thunderbolts found themselves on the deck. So low on gas, they decided against trying to regain altitude. And they headed for home, 350 miles away. They knew their best chance of survival laying in speed, surprise, and above all, in keeping low. How many Westphalian chimney pots were blown down by the blast of their passing the boys we'll never know, but Fong remembers vividly a rather intimate engagement with a large tree, coming suddenly of an airfield from which German fighters were taking off. The three dodged sharply, and Fong found himself boring through twigs and branches like a sausage grinder. Then they were across the Zuider Zee, and out to sea, Fong struggling with a propeller whose controls had been damaged by the impact. They had no idea except to reach England, where they might be able to bail out before gas was exhausted. Fong says at least one of the three was a badly scared guy. Then somebody decided to call control. They gained altitude to get within VHF range. And instantly the call was answered by the calm voice of the controller at Saffron. After getting a fix on the position of the aircraft, he gave them a steer to Woodbridge, the tremendous crash strip 1,000 feet wide and 10,000 feet long which the British had built on the East Coast for just such emergencies. The story ends with all three airplanes landing safely, and Lieutenant Fong picking Dutch vegetation out of his gun barrels. But the fear ended far out over the North Sea, when the voice from the upper room took over and led them home. This, then, was the nature of the American Fighter Control at Headquarters, 4th Air Defense Wing, Saffron Walden, Essex, at the 0 hour of the greatest aerial onslaught in history. This was the unseen but vital and growing force that was to help shape the design of the war. While as yet most of the young fighter pilots on their short sweeps at 30,000 feet, intent on the challenge and dangers of the moment, scarcely knew or cared if it existed. This is not to imply that the fighter pilots were willfully careless of the help control might give. The discipline of military teamwork is not ingrained in democratic peoples. And almost every American who started this war had a bit of the idea that he could win it single-handed. Fighter control, an untried and unfamiliar thing, had to prove itself by being valuable, and this the Saffron Walden personnel set out to do. Control, incidentally, found that pilots divided into three classes. Some didn't know there was a control, some didn't care anyway, and some, the best of course, who considered control a pretty good effort by quite a lot of skilled people. All pilots in the latter class were considered pretty good fellows, naturally. American escort of heavy bombers had begun as early as May of 1943. The extremely short range of the Thunderbolts and British Spitfires of that day, however, made it little more than a token support. The fighters could take the B-17s just past the enemy coast, come back and refuel, and then meet the heavies again to bring them out. The bitter battles with the Luftwaffe and the greater losses were occurring beyond fighter range, and the bombers were preoccupied with problems of defensive formations, gunnery training, and other means of self-protection. As they had from the beginning in 1942, the RAF Spits continued to help escort the bombers. But even working in relays, the fighters could not go far enough. With new American groups arriving in ETO, fighter sweeps were continuing as a means of acquainting pilots with the enemy territory. But the Jerrys had ceased to challenge these high-altitude milk runs, preferring to save their poison for the bombers. It was not until belly tanks came into general use in August 1943 that the routine training sweep began to drop off in favor of deeper penetrations with the bombers. It was not until the costly bomber missions to Schweinfurt and Regensburg on August 17th that pretty much everyone in the 8th became convinced that it was impracticable to send bombers far beyond fighter escort range. On this mission, the 56th Fighter Group went as far as Eupen, considered then a fantastically long trip, 230 miles from Halesworth. So we bring fighter control to the crossroads to that moment mentioned earlier, when the airplanes flew out of radar range. It was as if a curtain had been drawn in front of the controller's dais. The plots faded on the board, the formations flew on into the distant nowhere, and the controller staff faced the prospect of being completely out of touch until the groups came back into the magic circle, once more returning home. Here in the midst of plenty, surrounded by the best radar and communications network that science had been able to devise, Control went blind.